Al Jazeera.
Well, Rob Reynolds is standing by for us to discuss Nevada in a little while. We also have our White House correspondent Kimberly Halkett in Washington, D.C. But first, let's cross over to Mike Hanna in Joe Biden's home state of Delaware. And Mike, the vote count isn't over. A winner hasn't even been declared yet. The legal challenges are beginning, and it's Trump's camp that's making the first move.
Indeed, yes, but the Biden camp is responding. It's sent out legal teams in various states to contest the Trump applications. And in many cases, judges and courts in a number of states have rejected what they regard as baseless attempts by the Trump administration and the Trump campaign to interfere in this ongoing count. An advisor to Joe Biden, one of his legal advisors, describing the Trump campaign actions as baseless and, as he put it, stupid, pointing out, for example, that the demand of the Trump campaign to stop the count in Michigan would count against them, as Trump is leading, according to the lawyer, in Michigan. So by ending the count, Biden would win in that particular state. But there is one case that has got some traction. The Trump campaign had asked the Pennsylvania Supreme Court to be allowed to join a case against the Pennsylvania Secretary of State as a intervention as a petitioner. Now, the Supreme Court has actually instructed the Secretary of State in Pennsylvania to respond to the Trump campaign's request by 10 p.m. Thursday evening. So the Supreme Court getting involved, albeit in a limited way at this particular point. But that is the only case in which we've seen the Trump campaign gain traction in terms of its legal challenges in a number of areas.
Mike Hanna in Wilmington, Delaware. Thanks for the update. Let's cross over to Kimberly Halkett, our White House correspondent, watching events unfold for us from the White House. Obviously, the Trump camp monitoring events across those crucial states that are still counting their votes, but they're also not accepting the results as they stand.
That's absolutely right. And the challenge is to really keep the momentum going. We're getting a sense that there is a growing realization that this is starting to have a bit of finality to it, given the fact that there are news networks that are here in the United States beginning to call very close this race for Joe Biden. And as we watch these totals, many of the Trump supporters are getting increasingly discouraged. But what I can tell you is that there are still those legal challenges that are in place. And this is something that the Trump campaign, according to the White House press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, they believe that it's justified because there has been a history, not just in Michigan, specifically Detroit, but also in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, of corruption, particularly when it does come to other races that are far less significant in terms of magnitude on the national scale. So they believe that while they haven't got any evidence of ballot tampering, if you will, this time around, what they are suggesting is that they need to have more close scrutiny.
We'll see what happens in the coming hours. For the moment, Kimberly, thanks very much for the update. Pardon me. Let's cross over to Rob Reynolds on the other side of the United States in Los Angeles. And Rob, we're keeping a very close eye on two states. Let's begin with Arizona, because a developing situation there. We're hearing about protests. What's going on?
Yeah, that's right, Sohail. There's some reports that we have become aware of that are somewhat disturbing about a relatively small but growing group of protesters, many of them armed with weapons, with guns, who are gathering outside the Arizona state capitol in Phoenix, as well as the Maricopa County, that's Phoenix as well, election operations center. They're demanding an end to the counting of the votes. They shouted down a Republican official who attempted to explain the vote counting process to the demonstrators. And there's been a lot of shouting back and forth between the demonstrators and other people on the scene. No reports of any arrests, of any violence or anything like that at the moment, but it's certainly something we would want to keep an eye on.
Indeed, and let's also talk about Nevada, because it's a state now that's tantalizingly exciting for the Biden camp, because it could obviously confirm the presidency.
Exactly. So Haley, you might think that with all the casinos and gambling institutions in Nevada that they'd be a lot better at counting things very quickly. But the situation there is now that that Joe Biden has a slight edge over Donald Trump. It's less than 8,000 votes, about 0.6% of the total. The votes are coming from primarily from Clark County. That is the population center of the state of Nevada. It includes Las Vegas and other cities. And it is a Democratic stronghold. These are mail-in ballots that are being counted as the night goes on. The officials in that county say that they will release new information on Thursday morning about what they've discovered in terms of their counting. The mail ballots are valid if they are postmarked by Election Day yesterday, and they can be counted up until the 10th of November. At stake here is 6 electoral votes, which, as you mentioned, could be crucial for Joe Biden's attempts to reach the magic number of 270 that would win him the White House.
I think we might have to send them a few abacuses over there to Nevada and help them with the count. Rob, let's see what they say to that. For the moment, thank you. Biden's narrow victory in the swing state of Wisconsin has given him 10 electoral votes. Now, Trump's campaign is demanding a recount, and residents have taken to the streets. Natasha Gunnan reports now from the regional capital, Madison.
Despite the comeback story of the Democratic Party here in the state of Wisconsin, we're at a rally at the Capitol, and people here are saying they're here because this isn't over. They're standing for democracy, and they say they will not leave until every vote is counted in the United States. It was a good day for Democrats in the state of Wisconsin. Biden flipped the state by 20,000 votes. He edged ahead of Trump as absentee ballots were counted in the cities of Milwaukee, Green Bay, and Kenosha. In 2016, Trump won Wisconsin's 10 electoral college votes by less than 23,000 votes, earning him the distinction of being the first Republican presidential candidate to win in the state in more than 30 years. That was clearly something the Democrats did not want to have a repeat of. It was a bruising loss for them. So in the intervening years, they dumped a lot of money into the state. Biden campaigned heavily here, so did Trump. Now, the Trump campaign manager has said they will ask for a recount here in Wisconsin. The manager said that without any evidence, without citing any specific examples, that there have been reports of voter irregularities in several counties in Wisconsin. He also said that, quote, public polling was a kind of voter suppression tactic. Wisconsin, like many other states, had legal challenges coming into Election Day with regard to absentee ballots. The Supreme Court ruled that Wisconsin could not continue to count absentee ballots through November 6th, even if they were postmarked on Election Day. And the reason the state had planned to do that was because of the pandemic, because there have been real mail shortage, real mail delays in the state of Wisconsin. In any event, as the state braces for a possible recount, it's worth noting that Trump, when he won the state in 2016, he won it by less than 1%.
Well, there have also been protests in New York. Gabriel Elizondo has the latest from there.
Protests on the streets of New York City. Here in the heart of Times Square, these people are protesting what they say is voter suppression in America against black people. This is just one of multiple protests that were in New York City. Earlier in the evening, thousands of people took to the streets in Midtown. They walked more than 30 blocks and they were chanting, "Count every ballot, every vote counts." They were people that really showed some anger that the election was even being called into question by the president. And they said that they had to get out to the streets because they felt it was their civic duty to make their voices heard, that all the votes of everybody are counted.
Call people into the streets, call strikes, call action, shut this place down. I'm here because I want to join my voice to the thousands of others demanding that every vote be counted by law. It's a democracy, and everybody should have a voice.
I'm out here today for all the people who've mailed in their ballots and are wondering whether they're going to be counted. We know New York is going for Biden, but we don't know whether the voters in the swing states will be counted if Trump has his way. And we've learned that the only way to stop an attempted coup, like the one Trump is suggesting he would like to have now, is by having lots of people out in the streets peacefully demanding our rights.
Protesters here say they're prepared to come back out to the streets in the coming days if every vote is not counted.
Welcome back. You're watching Al Jazeera with me, Sahil Rahman. A reminder of our latest developments surrounding the US presidential elections. Democratic nominee Joe Biden is pulling ahead in the race for the White House. He's now won the state of Michigan, giving him 264 electoral votes, just 6 shy of the 270 required. Earlier, Biden said he was confident of securing enough states to win the presidency. But the Trump campaign has filed lawsuits to stop vote counting in Michigan, Georgia and Pennsylvania, while calling for a recount in Wisconsin. And it's also looking to intervene in a Supreme Court case to stop Pennsylvania counting votes up to 3 days after the election. And the count of absentee ballots continues in battleground states like Pennsylvania, Georgia and Arizona. It's a tight race in Nevada, where Joe Biden has a narrow lead. And this is how those results look on the map, with Wisconsin and Michigan now blue. The states still in play are here in yellow: Georgia, North Carolina, Nevada and Pennsylvania. Joe Biden just has 6 electoral college votes away and needed for victory. Charles Moran is a Republican political strategist, joins me now live via Skype from Washington, D.C. Good to have you with us on the programme. Can I first ask you how you react to these potential cases that the Trump camp wants to bring to court to stop the postal vote count?
Well, we know that there's a lot of issues with the mail-in voting procedures that were implemented as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The problem is that in so many of these different circumstances, all of the typical rules and all of the regulations that are typically used to deal with mail-in voting were not able to be implemented on such a wide level. The Trump campaign has correctly identified that in places like Wisconsin and Michigan, that there are so many irregularities given what's gone on, and that there are so many things that were not done appropriately, that it is wise to go ahead and ask for that recount, since the margin is so tight between the two candidates.
In terms of cut-off points, the courts have a very difficult task or an easy task ahead of them. Will they abide by the letter of the law, or will there be a bit of a leeway? How do you see that working?
Well, what the Republicans and President Trump's legal team are going to do is just simply say that the letter of the law needs to be followed. In our country, every state has the ability to set its own rules and regulations on that type of leeway. So President Trump is clear that every vote must count, but it's every legal vote must count, and votes that are cast illegally shouldn't be counted. And I think that's something that all sides can agree upon. And that's the genesis of the legal action the Republicans and President Trump are going to take.
And it is
legal votes should count, and legal votes shouldn't count.
It is the definition, isn't it, of what is an illegal vote, isn't it? And therefore each state is very different in the way that they count a vote or allow a vote to be legal, whether it was post-stamped on the 3rd of November and whether it arrives on the 3rd of November or after the 3rd of November. That's the real issue, isn't it?
Well, there are things like that, but also the amount of duplicate votings. How do you track whether or not somebody has done their mail-in ballot, but then has actually walked into the polling place the day of to cast a vote, and making sure that there's the appropriate reconciliation between the two.
OK, well, we'll see what happens there. Let's move on, though. For months now, the president has actually discredited postal votes. And so, therefore, the more you say it, the more it may become a truth. How much of that has worked for the president? Because it's very much been part of, you might say, the story of the last 12 months.
Well, again, I think that there's so much question about the way that mail-in balloting and mail-in voting, worked. Clearly, there are places like California where Republicans have been using absentee ballots, which is where you proactively request a ballot. And it's actually worked very well for the Republican Party. The challenge, and I don't think that President Trump is challenging using, an absentee process. The problem is when you blanket mail everyone, regardless of whether or not they've asked for it or not, it really brings up those inconsistencies. The places where 5, 6, 7 ballots are being mailed to the home of somebody who's been deceased for 10 years. Cases like that were existing. Where you see these apartment buildings and there's just piles and piles of ballots, and there's no accurate way, versus if you have an in-person election where it's one person, one vote, you can't have, one person who's collecting multiple ballots because you're in a voting center and it can be verified that you are given one ballot versus this other process where you don't really know and there's no external control. So I think that that's the part of the frustration that the president has had, is that this was rushed so quickly. The mail-in voting did not have the type of controls needed to ensure authenticity and accuracy.
The United States is often seen, one of the largest democracies in the world, and one of the most respected elections in the world. You'd think these sorts of problems would have been ironed out. We had the same scenario back in 2000, the Al Gore, George Bush, they went to the Supreme Court. And every election, we seem to have this problem. Why is the Election Commission or the election voting scenarios and the apparatus around voting in each of these states, why has this not been sorted out? Why has it not been clarified? Why hasn't it been clamped down on?
You're absolutely correct that this is a national embarrassment, and the United States should, and its citizens should deserve a more robust, comprehensive system for voting. In 2020, we should not be having these types of issues, and you're correct. In 2000, we were dealing with the hanging chads, and now we're talking about Sharpie markers bleeding through on ballots. I think part of the problem is this process is overly politicized. And, we're in a place, especially when, your state governments are dictating the rules on how elections are to be conducted. You see political influences creeping in and trying to jockey for one side or the other to give an advantage or a disadvantage to one group or another.
Well, we shall see what happens in the coming hours. Charles Moran, thank you very much for your insight and for joining us from Washington, D.C.
Thank you.